To Eleanor's relief, all the guests at Pengrave were familiar in one way or another. Lord Seaford had been a dear childhood friend of Adam's through their time spent at the same boarding school. Eleanor had not become acquainted with him until that evening, and she found herself wishing she had met him long before that. He and his wife were two of the most friendly, agreeable people she had ever met. Tall, lanky, with dark curls that spilled over his forehead and an ever-present smile, Lord Seaford was not at all how she had imagined a marquis to be. The title had fallen upon him unexpectedly, she had learned, as well as the estate, so he had not been born to such privilege. His wife, small and red-haired, was slightly quieter, but she teased her husband mercilessly. "Philip, you mustn't bore our guests with another description of your apple tree."
"How could they be bored? I know for a fact that my horses adore hearing about my apple tree, so I assumed our guests would too."
"The horses do not understand you."
"Perhaps not, but they love to eat the apples, and so will our guests."
Lord Seaford winked at his wife before turning to Eleanor and Henry.
"I have had a delicious apple tart prepared for dessert this evening."
Eleanor and Henry had been the first guests to arrive, and they sat in the parlour with their host and hostess, awaiting the arrival of Adam, Amelia, and her Aunt Margaret. The other guests that would be arriving were Mr. Harrison, his wife, Edward, Grace, and the Baron of Hove, who was Grace's uncle. The prospect of so many guests was daunting, but Eleanor knew she wouldn't receive any scorn from any of them. They knew the truth of her situation, not just the gossip. So far, Eleanor had sensed no disdain from Lord and Lady Seaford, who seemed quite happy to entertain Henry and Eleanor all evening. Lord Hove was the first of the other guests to arrive. He was a man of average height, with neatly combed grey hair, a yellow waistcoat, and a cane. He offered a flourishing bow when he entered the room, beaming with excitement as Lord and Lady Seaford introduced him to Eleanor and Henry.
"Ah, Mr. Beaumont, it is a pleasure to see you again. Your brother and my niece have always spoken so highly of you."
The Baron sat down on the nearby sofa, crossing his leg over his knee. Just moments later, the drawing-room door was opened again, and Amelia's Aunt Margaret stumbled through it, her cane catching on the edge of the door-frame. "Oh, good heavens! I did not mean to make such an entrance," she said around a gasp. Eleanor suspected that more of the woman's inhalations were gasps than not. She straightened her posture, fluffing her greying blonde curls before surveying the room. "Ah, dear Mr. and Mrs. Beaumont, I am very pleased to see you again." She smiled broadly, coming to take a seat beside Eleanor. "Are you enjoying your time in Brighton?" Eleanor asked. Margaret nodded, an energetic bounce of her head. "Yes, indeed. It is my favourite place in all of England, as well as its surrounding towns such as Seaford and Worthing, of course." She smiled at their host, her eyes flickering to their other guest, Lord Hove. Eleanor watched with amusement as Margaret's eyes settled on the man. Possessing an obvious inability to hide a single emotion she felt, Margaret's eyes rounded. "Oh, my! He is quite a handsome man, isn't he?" Eleanor refrained from releasing the laugh that rose in her throat. "Indeed." Henry seemed to be listening to the conversation as well, for Eleanor heard a small chuckle escape him.
"I happen to know that he was widowed years ago," Henry said. "He is quite eligible, I believe."
Margaret's eyes widened. "Have you yet made his acquaintance?" Eleanor asked. "No, but I certainly wish to." She winked, and Eleanor's laugh bubbled out. As if he had heard her request, Lord Seaford beckoned Lord Hove forward to meet Margaret. She stood, leaning heavily on her cane. Eleanor watched their introduction with growing amusement. Lord Hove appeared every bit as smitten with Margaret as she had been with him. The awkwardness of the exchange made her feel slightly better about her first interactions with Henry, although they had certainly been awkward as well. "Oh my! Where did you have your cane polished?" Margaret asked.
"London, I believe."
Lord Hove's voice was even more boisterous and friendly than Lord Seaford's.
"Yours is quite luminous as well."
"Thank you, sir. I do take great pride in keeping my cane in presentable condition." Margaret's smile was wider than Eleanor had ever seen it, her eyelashes batting in a method that could only be interpreted as flirtatious. Lord Hove grinned.
"As one should. A cane will always be my favourite accessory."
Margaret's smile grew impossibly wider. She did not seem to know what else to say, so she took to staring at his cane again. "I dare say yours is the most fashionable cane I have ever beheld." Henry nudged Eleanor's arm, and she turned to see him smiling. He tipped his head close to avoid being overheard.
"When we grow old, please promise me that we will not speak in endless circles over the attractive qualities of one another's canes."
She stifled her laugh with her gloved fingertips. "Would you prefer a conversation regarding the quality of the physicians that care for our gout, or the blacksmith that we pay to pull out our decaying teeth?" Henry tipped his head back, laughing.
"Certainly not."
Eleanor tapped her chin. "Perhaps we might choose to converse on the frustrations that arise due to scratched spectacles or dirty fingerprints on our antique silver. Is that the sort of conversation you would prefer?" Henry's laughter subsided, his smile softening.
"I would prefer a conversation like this."
She grinned, looking into his eyes. She would too. The thought of growing old at Henry's side filled her with so much sudden joy. It shocked her. She could see no other vision for her life now, when just a month ago she had not even known him. A month ago she had felt helpless, broken, and her future had been bleak. Now life was so very different, so very happy. The sensation of joy only lasted a short moment before reality sneaked into the corners of her mind. She still had not told Henry what had happened that day she left her old life behind. She couldn't bear the thought of him looking at her with caution, or fear, or even disgust. Her heart still hammered at the memory. Adam and Amelia entered the room, calling her attention to the doorway. She and Henry stood as they walked toward them.
"Eleanor,"
Adam smiled, clasping her hand between both of his.
"I have missed you."
She studied his face, sensing a strain behind his smile. "I have missed you too." Adam exchanged a glance with Amelia. Did Eleanor see worry in her expression?
"I am glad you were able to come tonight."
"As am I." Eleanor sensed the same worry in Adam's voice that she had seen in Amelia's features. Before she could question what it meant, the rest of the guests arrived, filling the large parlour with the sound of many friendly voices and introductions. She was seated near Mr. and Mrs. Harrison during the meal. Mr. Harrison's wife, Harriet, was just as amiable as he was. She was Grace's elder sister, but Eleanor never would have guessed it based on either their personalities or their appearances. Harriet spoke with Eleanor with fascination about her gown, jewellery, and hair arrangement, until her husband interrupted with a much more serious topic.
"Have you received any further threats from Mr. Quinton?"
the barrister asked, keeping his voice low. Eleanor glanced at Henry, but he sat across the table, engaged in a conversation with Edward. He did not notice Mr. Harrison's question. She clasped her hands together under the table, trying to ignore the sense of dread that the barrister's question imposed. "No, I have not. I believe he might have given up his efforts to take Arthur." She had been telling herself he had, if only to cope with her fear.
"I hope you are right. At any rate, you are well protected with Mr. Beaumont as your husband."
She nodded, catching Henry's eye from across the table. His brow creased with concern as he lightly noticed the worry that had fallen over her own features.
"You have nothing to worry yourself over, Mrs. Beaumont."
Mr. Harrison smiled, the friendly expression putting her at ease, if only for the moment. She was still unsettled by the worry she had seen in Adam. What was he hiding from her? When the entire meal had been served and the apple tart eaten, Eleanor and the other women removed to the parlour, while the men stayed back for their port. She found herself clutching at the fabric of her skirts, impatiently waiting for Henry and Adam to return. Chapter 14. The ambiance of the dining room was drastically different without the presence of the women. Henry sipped from his cup, eager to return to Eleanor's side. She had appeared worried over something, and he wanted to ensure she was well. Lord Seaford turned toward Henry, tipping his head to one side with curiosity.
"I must admit, I do not know the first half of what caused the marriage between yourself and your wife, but I cannot help but suspect a similarity to the circumstances that led me to my wife."
He chuckled.
"Besides the fact that my wife did not wish to marry me at all."
Henry glanced at Adam. He must have told Lord Seaford at least a small part of the story.
"What woman would not wish to marry a marquis?"
Henry said, avoiding the question. Eleanor hadn't wanted to marry him either.
"Jane most certainly did not," Lord Seaford said. "I cared for her much more than she cared for me. I still believe it to be true, though she argues to the contrary."
He smiled, and Henry found himself experiencing a pang of envy. Would Eleanor ever feel for him what he felt for her? There was still a barrier between them, one he could neither name nor hope to tear down. With Lord Seaford's laughter, Adam set down his glass, turning to Henry. He had been rather quiet all evening, and still spoke in a low voice.
"There is a matter of urgency I must speak with you about."
Henry raised his eyebrows.
"What is it?" "Mr. Quinton sent another letter to my home, addressed to Eleanor. It arrived shortly after she married you. He warned her again to surrender her custody of her son." Dread pooled in Henry's stomach. He had hoped the man had given up. "I knew he would not find her, so I responded to the letter simply stating that she never arrived at our residence and that she was now remarried. He hinted quite clearly in the letter that he still held her in suspicion for her late husband's death. I did not wish to worry Eleanor over it, but I thought you should know." Henry's mind raced. He had always been curious as to what truly happened to Eleanor's late husband, but he had known the topic to be one that made Eleanor distant. He thought of their conversation just a few days before. He had told her she had done nothing wrong. A cold sensation settled between his shoulders when he recalled her response. "You have done nothing wrong." "Yes, I have." He rubbed his forehead, his heart picking up speed. Had Eleanor killed Mr. Quinton? No, he refused to believe it. She was not a murderer, even if the man had been so cruel as to hurt her. And perhaps he deserved his demise. Henry knew Eleanor could not have deliberately done such a thing. She was too gentle. He knew her character to be more noble than that. Then what had happened? Adam lowered his voice even further. "Has Eleanor told you anything else about that day Mr. Quinton died?" Henry shook his head. "I know nothing." Adam traced his finger in a circle on the table, his jaw tight, his features focused in deep thought. "Do you think the elder Mr. Quinton's accusations carry any truth?" Henry's heart pounded, his mind searching for another explanation. Eleanor had run away from the north in such a hurry, and when she had met Henry on her journey, She had lied about her husband still being alive. Had she been afraid of being caught for a crime? He refused to believe it. I don't know. The rest of the table had fallen silent. The gazes of Edward, Lord Hove, Mr. Harrison, and Lord Seaford all fixed on Henry and Adam, apparently sensing the tension of the conversation. For the first time all night, Lord Seaford stopped smiling, his eyes settling on Adam with concern. He didn't pry for information, but simply made a suggestion. "Shall we all rejoin the ladies in the drawing-room?" Adam stood and Henry followed, stepping out the doorway behind the rest of the men. When they entered the hallway, Lord Seaford patted Adam on the shoulder. "You may discuss your matter in privacy." "Thank you," Adam said, taking a deep breath. They waited for the rest of the party to disperse before returning to the dining-room table. Adam sat down heavily, running his hand through his dark hair. "I did not want to believe it to be true. I know Mr. Quinton was a terrible man, and after what he did to Eleanor, I might have killed him myself." "Agreed," Henry muttered. "But how could Eleanor have murdered him?" Adam shook his head. "Still, it seems as though the elder Mr. Quinton's greatest aim is to secure the child and his property for himself, not to have Eleanor punished for the crime." "We still do not know for certain if a crime was committed," Henry said. "We must learn the truth from Eleanor." He needed to find out. He had done all he could to earn her trust, yet she had still been keeping a secret from him. He did not know what more he could do. "I will find a way to speak with her alone tonight," Henry said. "Perhaps I can convince her to tell me what really happened that day." Adam stared at him for a long moment. "Are you certain she trusts you enough? Perhaps I should do it." "She trusts me," Henry said, only partially sure of his words. "She will tell me everything, I assure you." Adam nodded resolutely. "Very well." He stood, his face grim. "Let us make a plan that allows the two of you to leave the drawing-room alone so you may speak with her. I would love to sort this out tonight before you return to Worthing. But if it is true what Mr. Quinton has accused her of, and he has a way to prove it, then she will certainly lose Arthur, and we both will lose her." Henry's heart seized, the pain surprising him. He could not lose Eleanor, no matter what. Eleanor craned her neck over the women on the sofa beside her as the men returned to the drawing-room. For a moment she thought she saw Henry, but it was only his brother. She waited, watching as each man entered the room, but Henry and Adam were not among them. What had delayed them? She met Lord Seaford's eyes, who smiled with reassurance as he took a chair beside his wife. "Your husband and brother will be here shortly." She stared at the door, hoping that shortly meant a matter of seconds. Growing up with Adam, she had learned how to decipher his expressions, and she knew how to judge when he was anxious. Tonight, he was certainly anxious about something. She glanced at Amelia, who sat near the pianoforte, her own gaze fixed on the door as well. She seemed eager to have Adam arrive as well, but she likely knew what it was that was worrying him. Eleanor was left to wonder. After several minutes, just when she was tempted to stand up and go in search of them, Henry and Adam entered the room, both their expressions solemn as they looked at her. Her heart thudded. What had happened? Thankfully, the chair to her right had been left empty. Henry crossed the room and took a seat beside her, throwing her a brief smile. She glanced at Adam, who had stopped in front of Lord Seaford, whispering something to him before sitting down nearby. What were they speaking about? Her curiosity heightened. Is this how Henry felt every time he looked at her? Lord Seaford smiled when Adam finished his whispering, addressing the room. Is there anyone that would be willing to venture to the music room upstairs to find my wife's sheet music? I would love to have you hear her latest piece on the violin. She has been practicing with dedication for weeks."
His wife threw him a look of confusion. "Might you send a servant to fetch it? You need not ask one of our guests." To Eleanor's surprise, Henry stood.
"That is not necessary. I will fetch it for you."
He looked down at Eleanor.
"Would you accompany me?"
She nodded, finding it rather strange, as Lady Seaford had, that they were being sent on such an errand. She stood to take Henry's arm.
"Ah, thank you," Lord Seaford said. "It is the piece on the stand beside the violin. You will not miss it."
Adam's eyes followed them as they walked out into the hall. Eleanor glanced up at Henry as the door closed behind them, silence enfolding the empty hallway. "You have never been to Pengrave, have you? Do you even know the location of the music room?" she asked, raising one eyebrow at him. Henry shrugged.
"I am not entirely certain, but it cannot be very difficult to find."
He seemed more nervous than she had ever seen him. What had he and Adam been discussing? They walked quietly down the hall until they reached the staircase. There was something odd in Henry's posture, as if he were anticipating something, thinking deeply over words he hadn't yet spoken. He glanced at her, his eyes heavy, his mouth firm. "What is the matter?" she asked, unable to contain her curiosity. "You and Adam have been acting rather strangely this evening." He held onto the banister with one hand as they ascended the staircase, and she trailed slightly behind him, studying his posture. Something was definitely wrong. He remained silent until they reached the second floor. The level was not as well lit as the main floor. She could barely make out the features of Henry's face when he stopped walking, tipping his head down to look at her.
"I spoke with Adam in the dining room,"
he said, his voice slow and deliberate. "What did you speak about?" Henry sighed, raking a hand over his hair. She had never seen him so uncollected before.
"Adam received another letter from Mr. Quinton."
Her heart fell. The hallway seemed to close in around her. "What did the letter say?"
"I did not read it, but Adam said it was essentially a repetition of the same threats he extended before, but with a greater emphasis on his accusations."
Eleanor could hardly think, hardly breathe. "Did he mention that he knew where I was? That he knew where Arthur was?"
"No, he seemed to believe that you had taken up residence with your brother in Brighton, but the letter was received weeks ago, so he could have discovered your location by now."
Henry took a step closer, his eyes boring into hers.
"Eleanor, I need you to tell me what truly happened the day you left. I need to know what happened to your late husband. It will not take long for Mr. Quinton to take Arthur if he has a way to prove your guilt."
Eleanor pressed her hand to her stomach, feeling suddenly ill. She closed her eyes. No, she could not speak of that day. She could not tell Henry the truth. She saw the white curtain, the flash of red, all still vivid, too vivid, in her mind.
"Eleanor,"
Henry's voice broke through her thoughts.
"Please tell me."
He took her hand, and she realized how violently it shook. She heard Arthur's scream so clearly, almost as if it were happening all over again. Tears leaked from her eyes, spilling down over her cheeks. Henry caught them carefully with his thumb, patiently waiting for her to speak. Her eyes opened, meeting his in the dimness. His hand cupped the side of her face, his eyes pleading. How relieving it would be to confide in him, but how devastating it would be if he knew what she had done, if he recognized the danger she put his reputation in, If he decided he no longer wished to care for her and Arthur, he could very well annul the marriage. She couldn't bear the thought. He lifted his free hand to the other side of her face, cradling it, his hands gentle, safe and strong. "Please tell me." She shook her head, her tears spilling between his fingers. "I cannot tell you." Henry stared down at her, asking, begging something of her that she didn't understand how to give. There was no uncertainty in truth, but there was too much uncertainty in speaking it in that moment. She had once trusted Mr. Quinton enough to tell him the truth of her dowry, a secret she had been encouraged to keep by her father. Mr. Quinton had used that truth to destroy her. This secret that Henry now demanded of her, what would he do with it? She couldn't bear the thought of losing her and Arthur's new home. She couldn't bear the thought of losing Henry and his good opinion forever. His voice came again, firmer this time, pleading. "Trust me." "I don't know how," she said, the words mingled with a sob. "It is never too late to learn." Henry tipped his head closer. His thumb traced over the corner of her mouth before brushing over her lower lip. She drew a sharp breath before Henry covered her mouth with his. He kissed her the same way he spoke to her and looked at her, carefully, adoringly. He kissed her with all the gentleness and cautious passion she had expected of him. She had never been kissed like that before. She had never been kissed like she was both fragile and strong, wanted and loved. Her heart felt as though it had both broken and healed within seconds, the soft touch of Henry's lips causing a tremor within her, an awakening of the feelings she had been hiding from him and from herself. He pulled away too soon, pressing his forehead against hers. "I love you, Eleanor." He met her eyes. "I will love you no matter what." Her legs shook beneath her, her lips burning from Henry's kiss. She knew he was telling her the truth. He did love her. Her heart hammered against her ribs, urging her to answer his question, to tell him all the truths she too had been hiding. She wanted to tell him how much he meant to her, how much she had come to love him, but she couldn't find the words. She could not believe that she had once struggled to say thank you. Speaking of love was much more difficult, and speaking of that day she left the north was proving to be the most difficult of all. He did not ask the question again, but she saw it in his eyes. He wanted to know what happened the day she and Arthur escaped. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to remember. "I told you that Mr. Quinton had no qualms about striking me or hurting me, but he never hurt Arthur," she began, taking a deep breath. She swiped at her cheeks, clearing the last of her tears. "Mr. Quinton died the very day we left for Brighton." She took a shaking breath. "And it was my fault. Mr. Quinton had been awake late, drinking at the local assembly the night before. Arthur was fascinated by Mr. Quinton's favourite pocket watch. Arthur sneaked into his room early the next morning, seeing that his father was still asleep, and took the watch." Eleanor looked away from Henry's face, afraid to see his reaction. I did not see Arthur in time to stop him. He accidentally broke the watch as he was playing with it. I came out to the hallway just as Mr. Quinton discovered Arthur outside his room with the broken watch. He was furious." She shook her head as a tear escaped. "Furious! I have never seen Arthur so frightened. I had never been so frightened. But then Mr. Quinton returned to his room, and he brought out his pistol." She swallowed. "He was not in his right mind. He aimed it at Arthur, and I pushed him." Her tears began anew. I pushed Mr. Quinton as hard as I could, and he fell back. The staircase was behind him, and the pistol fired as he hit the ground. He tumbled down the stairs, and I knew—" She sniffed, wiping her cheek. "I knew he was dead. I covered him with a white sheet so Arthur would not see. Then I packed our things as quickly as I could and ran. I did not want the elder Mr. Quinton to find us. I did not know what else to do." Henry caught the next tear that fell, and the next, before pulling her into his arms. She rested her head against his chest, both relieved and shocked that he had not pushed her away. "You saved Arthur's life. That is nothing to be ashamed of," Henry said. "You should have told me sooner." "I am not ashamed. I was just so afraid." She had no other explanation than that. But she did not want to be afraid any longer. She did not need to be afraid ever again, not with Henry by her side. "You did the only thing you could have done," he whispered into her hair. He held her until she stopped shaking, rubbing circles over her back. She would have stayed there forever, but Lord Seaford was likely seconds away from sending someone else to find his music. "Do you think Mr. Quinton will find us?" Eleanor asked, tipping her head up to look at Henry. His eyes flashed with uncertainty. "I don't know." "I cannot seem to forget that day Arthur climbed the tree." Her voice was just a whisper, and it sent chills running up and down her own spine. Henry stared at her for a long moment. "You do not need to worry. There is nothing Mr. Quinton can do to take custody of Arthur. He is helpless. He has no way to prove you are involved in his son's death. It was accidental. With my brother and Lord Seaford to testify to your character, Mr. Quinton will have no chance with the courts." He brushed her hair back, giving her a soft smile. "Not to worry." She closed her eyes, allowing herself to relax. He was right. She had nothing to worry about. They found the music room without any trouble, taking the music from the stand near the violin, as Lord Seaford had instructed. They returned to the party, the last of Eleanor's tears dried. To excuse their extended absence, they claimed that the music room had been much more difficult to find than it actually had been. Eleanor's cheeks had refused to cool since Henry had kissed her and told her he loved her. Why had she been too afraid to say it back? She was tired of being afraid. But she had told him the truth. Her courage was coming in small pieces, and she had to be grateful for that. The moment she felt courageous again, she would tell Henry how much she loved him. However, she was not feeling courageous at the moment. The only thing she could feel was anxiety. Arthur was so far away. After speaking of the elder Mr. Quinton again, her feeling of peace had been fleeting. All she could think of was Arthur, and how she could hardly wait to return home to him. She had promised to see him before he went to bed, and it was growing late. After listening to a poetry reading by Margaret and a violin performance by Lady Seaford, Henry stood, thanking the host and hostess, and excusing them from the party. It seemed he was as eager to return home as she was. Before they could leave, Adam met them in the hall. Henry explained everything to him, exactly as Eleanor had said it, detailing the events of the day she and Arthur left. Adam hugged her, relaying similar words as Henry had, words meant to reassure her that Mr. Quinton was not a threat to be concerned about. But neither Adam nor Henry had met him. They had not seen the hardness in his eyes, the fierce ownership he had taken over Arthur, to guardianship than his own mother. Though Adam expressed the same phrase to Eleanor as Henry had, not to worry, her unease only seemed to grow as they took their leave and began the lengthy drive back to Worthing. Chapter 15. The house was fairly dark when the coach pulled up the drive, very few candles burning in the windows. Henry helped Eleanor down to the ground, keeping her hand in his as they walked toward the front doors. He felt closer to Eleanor than he ever had, now that he knew she trusted him fully. He still did not know if she loved him, but he would wait patiently to find out. He had taken a great deal of time and effort to gain her trust, and he suspected her love was even more difficult to win. Even so, Henry could think of hardly anything but their kiss as she looked up at him, her eyes shining dark under the night sky, her crimson lips pressing together. She had welcomed it, hadn't she? He could not recall much from the kiss they had shared, nothing except the fact that it had felt nothing short of perfect. He had known that he loved her, but he had not known how madly he loved her until that moment. He held her hand tightly as they walked through the front doors. "Do you think Arthur has already gone to bed?" Eleanor asked, glancing toward the staircase.
"I should hope not."
Henry followed her gaze up the stairs.
"You did promise him a kiss."
Henry found himself wishing he had received such a promise. "I do not want to wake him, but I want him to know we are home." Her voice came off nervous.
"Let us see if he is awake,"
Henry said, before leading her up the stairs. The second floor was not as bright as the main level, just as it had been at Pengrave that evening. All the doors in the hallway were closed, not a single candle burning on the wall sconces. Henry found it rather odd that Arthur had been put to bed so early, and Eleanor seemed to have the same thought, her brows pulling together as they walked closer to Arthur's closed door. Eleanor grabbed the handle, opening it just a crack. Moonlight from his window spilled into the hallway, and she pulled the door open wider before walking into the room. Henry followed, his heart dropping when Eleanor turned to him, her eyes round with concern. "Arthur is not in bed."
"He isn't?"
Henry took 2 large strides around her, his gaze landing on the made bed, with no sign that Arthur had been in it that night. His chest constricted with dread.
"Perhaps he is with Adeline in the library. He does enjoy stories before bed."
Eleanor seemed to relax slightly at his suggestion. Yes, that could be so. Henry led the way out of the room and down the stairs. When they reached the library, his dread intensified. The doors were closed, with no sign of light within. Henry walked inside, finding the interior of the room deserted. "Henry?" Eleanor's voice cracked as she paced the hall. "Where else could he be?" He stopped her, taking her hands in his to calm their shaking.
"Not to worry. He must be with Adeline somewhere. We must first find her, and then we will have found Arthur."
Eleanor nodded. "They could be in the kitchen. I know your cook has given Arthur scraps of dough during her evening baking. Perhaps he wandered there."
"That is very plausible,"
Henry said, trying to keep his voice positive. His own chest still felt weighed down by worry.
"Nothing has happened to Arthur,"
he tried to reassure himself. He couldn't imagine Adeline leaving Arthur's side for long enough for him to get lost. But where the devil was she? The kitchen was also empty. Eleanor framed her face with her hands, taking a deep breath. "I knew we should not have left him." Henry hated to see Eleanor like this. She began walking down the hall, stopping at every door and peering through it. "Arthur!" she called. "Where are you?"
"Let us check below stairs. Adeline might have taken him down with the other servants."
Henry could not imagine why she would do that, but it was still a possibility. They hurried to the main level. Henry started toward the servants' doors, but stopped when Silas rounded the corner, carrying a stack of Henry's freshly washed trousers.
"Ah, good evening." "Silas," Henry said, "would you assist us for a moment? We cannot seem to find Adeline, the nursemaid. Arthur was left in her care."
Silas frowned.
"I haven't seen Adeline all evening, sir." Henry exchanged a glance with Eleanor, who had paled significantly. "But I've been below stairs," Silas said, shifting the stack of clothing to one arm, scratching his freckled forehead. "I suppose she could be outside with the boy." Henry's heart picked up speed, his senses on high alert. Eleanor's face exhibited the same confusion he felt. "I do not understand. Arthur would never run away, and Adeline is perfectly capable of looking after him." She paused, her eyes potent with fear. "Do you think Mr. Quinton came to the property?" Henry could not deny that the thought had crossed his mind. He exhaled, running his hand over his hair. His anxiety was beginning to match Eleanor's. "I do not see how he could have found a way past my servants. I instructed them to keep a close watch on the property, and if he had tried to apprehend him, Adeline would have made enough noise to draw attention to him and receive help." Henry enlisted the assistance of his butler, 2 stable hands, his groundskeeper, and Silas, all of whom helped circle the house and property in search of Arthur and Adeline. Henry kept Eleanor at his side as they searched, calling Arthur's name. They even checked the same tree he had climbed before, finding the branches empty and dark. "Look!" Eleanor bent over near the base of the tree. Arthur's bilbo catch lay half buried in the overgrown grass. Henry picked it up, a cold chill climbing over his shoulders. "He was here." Eleanor looked up at him, her eyes flashing with the same dread he felt. "It must have been Mr. Quinton. He found us, Henry." She shook her head, covering her mouth. "He took Arthur, and he took Adeline with them." Henry studied the grass that led to the road beyond the trees. Silas stood nearby, seemingly noticing the same thing Henry did. "Horse hooves," Silas said. "Horse hooves, Eleanor," Henry repeated, pointing at the imprints in the grass. "Mr. Quinton must have taken Arthur with him on horseback. If he made his way onto the property from the trees, then he would not have been seen by the servants near the house." Henry took Eleanor's hand and sprinted to the stables, throwing the doors open with a crash. The horses whinnied in alarm, stamping their hooves in the stalls. 2 nearby grooms helped him saddle a horse, and Silas saddled one of his own, intent to help in the search. Henry chose a stallion for Eleanor as well, trusting the horse to be a sedate one. "Are you confident to ride on your own?" he asked her. She had told him that she hadn't ridden in years. Eleanor nodded, raising her chin. "I will manage." She appeared so small, so terrified, but trying to be brave. His heart ached. He would find Arthur no matter what it took. As they led the horses out of the stables, Henry noticed one of his mares was not in her stall. He paused. The doors had not been left open, so she could not have wandered out. He set aside the concern, knowing it to be far less pressing than his current situation. He helped Eleanor mount first, then mounted beside her. He had set her up with a regular saddle, knowing they could move faster if she rode astride. She still wore the gown she had worn at the party that evening, and thankfully the skirts had enough fullness to situate around the saddle and horse without tearing. She gripped the reins, her face tightening with determination. Henry mounted his horse and led the way toward the trees. Both Eleanor and Silas helped keep track of the hoof marks in the grass, but as soon as they reached the road, there was no sign of them. They chose to ride east, calling Arthur's name into the darkness. Henry urged his horse faster, galloping over the deserted road. He prayed under his breath. He had promised to keep Eleanor and Arthur safe. He had promised, and he was nothing if not a man of his word. The roads of Worthing were fairly uneven, and when it began to rain, the horses struggled to keep their speed through the mud. They pressed on through the wet storm. He could not wait until the next morning to call on the constable. He had to find Arthur tonight, before his captor took him too far to trace.
Eleanor's voice had gotten stronger, more desperate as she called Arthur's name. They rode as fast as possible. Henry's clothing was soaked all the way through, his vision becoming blurred through the rain that pounded down on his head. The streets were hardly lit, the storm clouds covering the moon. Henry slowed down to allow Eleanor and Silas to catch up. As lightning struck, his horse shifted anxiously. The sudden light afforded Henry a view of the ground below. His heart jumped in his chest. In front of their own horses was a set of hoof prints, stretching out for as far as he could see. The storm had just begun a few minutes before, so the animal that had made the prints must not have been far ahead. Henry would wager it had been Mr. Quinton. At least he was on the right path. He knew an inn to be on this road, and he suspected Mr. Quinton would have stopped there for shelter rather than carry on through the storm. Since the rain could calm at any moment, Henry led the way with more determination, urging his horse faster. The light of the inn glowed in the distance, and when he finally reached it, he was relieved to see the tracks they had been following stop. He dismounted quickly, leaving his horse with Silas and helping Eleanor down from hers.
"Look who it is," Silas said, walking toward a different horse that had been sheltered nearby.
Henry squinted before realization dawned on him. It was his mare, the one that had been missing from the stables. The colouring of her coat was distinctive, a unique shade of ginger.
"What is she doing here? How could Mr. Quinton have gotten past my stable hands?"
Silas simply shrugged, shaking his head in disbelief. It was very strange. Henry turned to Eleanor. Her hair had fallen out of its style, hanging wet around her face, splattered in mud, just as it had been that first day he met her on her journey to Brighton. "Do you think Arthur is here?" she asked. Her gaze flickered to the windows of the inn.
"My mare is here, so its rider must be here too."
Henry guided her to the front door, pushing it open firmly. Silas followed close behind. The guests in the parlour glanced up from their plates and card games, shocked by the clatter of the door. The scent of burning pine mingled with wet travellers wafted up to Henry's nose. He could also smell a blend of cinnamon and herbs, as if they had been sprinkled about the room in an attempt to mask the unpleasant smell of the travellers. A man who appeared to be the innkeeper moved from behind the bar to greet them, a look of disapproval and surprise on his face. Henry met him halfway.
"Have you received a young boy with black hair with any of your guests this evening?"
The innkeeper's surprise only seemed to increase with Henry's abrupt question, his bushy grey eyebrows lifting.
"I have many guests staying here this evening. I cannot say for certain."
Henry opened his mouth to ask another question, but stopped. A dark flash caught his eye near the staircase. He jerked his head toward it, catching sight of a small arm as it rounded the corner to the hall. He heard Eleanor gasp behind him. She had seen it too. There were likely a number of children at the inn that night, but he could have sworn it was Arthur he had seen. He stepped away from the innkeeper, rushing toward the hallway with Eleanor close behind. As he rounded the same corner, he heard a door slam shut near the end of the hall. With large strides, he ran, not caring if he disturbed any slumbering guests. He stopped in front of the door he thought he had seen closing. Eleanor stopped beside him, her breathing heavy. "Henry, please be careful." Her eyes stared into his, large and round. Her voice fell to a whisper. "Mr. Quinton is dangerous, and I do not know what I would do if he hurt you, or—" She shook her head.
"I will not let him take Arthur," Henry said, his voice gentle and resolute at once. "I promise. Did you see which room he entered?"
She shook her head, leaning toward the nearest door. "Arthur!" she called. A small voice met Henry's ears from within the room. "Mamma! the second half of the word was muffled. Henry jerked on the handle, but the door was locked. He took 2 steps back, running at the door with all his strength, aiming his shoulder at it. The door rattled in the frame, but did not open. Silas gave it his best try as well, but the door refused to budge. "What the devil is happening here?" The innkeeper appeared in the hallway, his face red and puffy with anger. His eyes narrowed at Henry. "Get out of my inn at once!" Eleanor turned to him, desperation in her eyes. "My son has been abducted, and he is being held in that room." The innkeeper's expression immediately shifted to one of concern, and he sprang into action. He withdrew a set of keys from his pocket, muttering to himself as he searched for the correct one. Henry felt close to bursting with impatience as the innkeeper tried 3 different keys on the door, none of which were correct. After his 5th attempt, the handle turned, and he threw the door open. Henry barged inside, his gaze jumping around the room. He could see a 4-poster bed, a dresser, and a curtained window. No sign of Arthur. When he walked further into the room, though, he heard a muffled whimper from behind the door. He stepped around it to see Arthur standing there, a hand firmly covering his mouth, a hand that was much too small to belong to Mr. Quinton. Henry's gaze jumped up to the woman's face. It was Adeline. Chapter 16. Adeline released Arthur as soon as Henry saw her, backing into the corner behind the door. "Arthur!" Eleanor's voice was a mixture of relief and astonishment. Henry scooped Arthur up and into his arms, far away from Adeline's reach. Arthur wrapped his arms around Henry's neck, his muscles trembling. Eleanor kissed his cheeks, smoothing her hand over his hair. Henry turned his gaze back to Adeline, his brow tightening in confusion, his jaw clenching with anger. He couldn't believe she would abduct Arthur, and he couldn't imagine why. But here she was, appearing as guilty as one possibly could, with tears streaming down her face. "What are you doing here with Arthur?" he demanded. Adeline stepped out from behind the door. She wrapped her arms around herself, glancing ruefully at him. I'm sorry. I had to take him." "Why?" From the expression on her face, Henry never would have guessed she would willfully abduct a child. Adeline sobbed, sniffing loudly. "My master saw your advertisement in town and sent me to take the position of nursemaid at your home. He grew impatient. He wanted the boy, and he told me I had to take him tonight while you were gone." She took a deep, quaking breath. "I stole your horse. I was instructed to meet him here, but he has not yet arrived. I do not know what he will do to me if he discovered I failed." She wiped her nose. "I am sorry. I am so very sorry. I was so afraid." Henry glanced at Eleanor, who stared at Adeline with shock. It was not fair how many times Eleanor's trust had been betrayed. Now, after Adeline's betrayal, he knew by some small measure what that felt like. He had trusted Adeline to look after Arthur. "Mr. Quinton is your master?" Eleanor asked. "You were in his employ before taking the position at our home." Adeline nodded. "Yes. He went to Brighton in search of you and Arthur several weeks ago. It did not take long for him to learn of your recent marriage to Mr. Beaumont. Knowing he could no longer secure custody of Arthur through the courts, he decided he needed a different way." She swallowed, looking down shamefully. "He saw the advertisement for your need of a nursemaid, and he sent me to apply. I did not know his plan until he wrote me a letter with detailed instructions and threats, and then he came to the property to speak with me. He tried to take the boy himself, but he was unsuccessful. He needed me to meet him here tonight with Arthur." If I didn't obey, he said he'd put my entire family out of work.
Her eyes grew round.
I still should not have done it. I should have told you.
She continued her sobbing, tears falling down her face and dripping off her chin. So it had not been Arthur's imagination that day when he climbed the tree, when he claimed to have seen Mr. Quinton. Henry's anger toward Adeline subsided, but was quickly replaced by renewed anger toward Mr. Quinton. Adeline was 16 years old, and he had threatened her, just as he continued to threaten Eleanor. Henry held Arthur tighter in his arms. He needed to get him and Eleanor out of the inn before Mr. Quinton arrived. The innkeeper watched the exchange with growing concern.
I would never have allowed such a thing to occur at my inn. How atrocious! Where is this man?
Henry handed Arthur to Eleanor, ushering Silas forward. If Mr. Quinton is arriving at any moment, we must be prepared outside to meet him.
Eleanor shook her head hard. No, we must take Arthur home. We must leave before Mr. Quinton finds us.
I will not risk this happening again, Henry said. Stay here where you are safe, and Silas and I will wait outside for his arrival.
Eleanor wrapped her arms around Arthur, her face pleading over his shoulder. Please be careful, Henry.
It was Mr. Quinton who would need to be careful. Henry gritted his teeth, stepping out of the doorway. There was no police force in England that would protect his family for him. It was Henry's duty to do so, to defend their honour and their safety. Henry turned to Adeline before leaving. Based on his instructions, do you think Mr. Quinton will be arriving soon? She glanced at the clock on the wall and nodded, fear flashing in her eyes.
At any moment.
He would make Mr. Quinton wish he had never dared threaten his family. Henry planned to prove once and for all that he was not born to be a vicar. Would you like my sword? Silas asked as they stepped outside the inn. Henry was not surprised in the slightest that Silas had brought his sword with him. I do not think it will be necessary, Henry said, squinting through the dark. They waited for several minutes, Henry's fists clenching at his side. Where the devil was he? In the distance, a horse came into view, its rider indistinguishable in the dark. Is that him? Silas asked. As the rider came closer, Henry walked forward a few paces, catching sight of the man's dark hair and large stature. Based on his age and overall appearance, he fit Eleanor's description. The man could only have been Mr. Quinton. Henry's jaw tightened. Henry watched as the man dismounted and began walking toward the front doors of the inn. Henry and Silas stepped in front of the doors as he approached. The man removed his hat, his hair dripping down his wrinkled skin, two piercing blue eyes meeting Henry's. Excuse me, gentlemen. The man's voice was clipped, deep and gruff. I'm afraid we cannot let you pass. It took all of Henry's concentration not to plant a facer on the man that very moment, without warning. He took a steadying breath, fixing him with a firm stare instead. I beg your pardon? The man glared at him. Step aside at once. Are you Mr. Quinton? Henry asked. The man's eyes flashed with surprise, then suspicion. Who are you? Henry took that as his answer. I discovered my nursemaid's scheme to deliver my stepson to you here at this inn. I stopped her before she could carry it out. Henry didn't want him to know that Arthur and Eleanor were inside the inn. If he could control it, he wanted to ensure that they never had to see Mr. Quinton again. The man's eyes hardened, flashing with anger. Your stepson? I know you have been trespassing on my property, threatening one of my servants, and attempting to abduct Arthur. I will not allow it to continue. Mr. Quinton's eyes shifted over Henry's shoulder at the inn door behind him, before settling on his face again with chilling determination.
I will find a way to take my grandson away from his murderous mother and have her convicted for her crimes.
Henry's anger threatened to spill over.
She has not committed a crime, but you have.
Mr. Quinton paced back a step, laughing quietly under his breath.
Your wife murdered my son before fleeing to Brighton. I will have her stand trial for it, and she will be accused. I cannot stand by while my grandson is in the hands of such a wicked woman.
Henry stepped forward, taking Mr. Quinton by the front of his shirt. He jerked away, pushing Henry against the inn door. Silas intervened, stepping between them.
Do not utter one more insult against my wife,
Henry said. Mr. Quinton glared at him, his eyes glinting like steel.
Where is the boy? That is none of your concern. It most certainly is. If you do not hand him over now, I will have your wife taken to court for her murder of my son. She did not murder your son. You have no witnesses to support your claim. I am only seeking what is best for the child, Mr. Quinton spat. Do you truly claim to care for the boy? You only want control of the properties entitled to him. Did you know your son tried to kill him that day Eleanor fled? The only reason Arthur was safe in that house, living under the care of his own father, was because of Eleanor. She protected him. She saved him. Mr. Quinton's anger only grew. My son would never do such a thing. Not only did he hurt Arthur that day, but he hurt Eleanor often. For reasons she deserved to be punished for. Henry's jaw clenched, and Silas had to stop him from lunging at Mr. Quinton, pulling Henry back by the shoulders. He took a heavy breath. Henry found himself wishing he did not have such a strong conscience and sense of honour. Being above Mr. Quinton in social status, he could not challenge him to a duel. It would be highly dishonourable. But he was tempted. He assumed Edward would have had no problem thrusting his fist into Mr. Quinton's nose, and he would have encouraged Henry to do it too. Henry had never found himself wishing he was more like Edward. Henry needed to do something. He could not leave Eleanor and Arthur to live in fear any longer. With Mr. Quinton determined to take Arthur, they would never be at peace. His own determination rose, and he squared his shoulders. He could not challenge Mr. Quinton to a duel, but if he could draw a challenge out of Mr. Quinton, then he would readily accept it. Your son was a monster of the most despicable sort, Henry said. He deserved to die that day. Mr. Quinton's eyes flashed. Eleanor did not kill him. His own vile character killed him, his own greed and rage and dishonour. Henry took a step closer to Mr. Quinton, his face just inches away. And I see quite clearly where he learned it from. Mr. Quinton growled, slapping Henry across the face with his gloved hand. Henry's cheek stung, but he maintained Mr. Quinton's gaze. I challenge you, Mr. Quinton said, his voice shaking with rage. I challenge you to a duel at dawn tomorrow. Until? First blood. Henry expected nothing less cowardly from a man like Mr. Quinton. Swords or pistols? Swords. There was more that needed to be sorted out through the duel than a mere offence of honour. He needed to ensure Mr. Quinton never came near them again. I wish to set more terms upon this duel. If I am victorious, you will vow never to come near my home or my family again. And if I am victorious, you will hand over the boy. Never. Mr. Quinton gritted his teeth, his nostrils flaring.
Without warning, he reached in his jacket and withdrew a pistol, aiming it at Henry's chest. His heart seized. The inn door opened behind him, the hinges creaking, momentarily distracting Mr. Quinton. Before the opportunity could pass, Henry grabbed Mr. Quinton's arm, twisting it downward, just before his shot cut through the air. A woman's scream came from behind him, and his blood froze. No! Henry turned around, shocked to see Adeline in the open doorway, crumpled to the ground, clutching her leg. Her skirts were already stained with blood from the wound Mr. Quinton's shot had inflicted. The guests in the parlour all stood, gasping and shouting as men gathered in the doorway to help Adeline. Eleanor and Arthur stood in the parlour as well, less than 3 feet behind where Adeline had been standing. Henry met Eleanor's eyes briefly before turning back toward Mr. Quinton. Silas had already torn the pistol from his grip and was struggling to wrestle him to the ground. The innkeeper pushed through the crowd and assisted Silas in detaining Mr. Quinton. They forced him away from the scene, tying his arms behind his back. Henry stooped over Adeline, taking off his jacket to apply pressure to the wound in her leg. A man, claiming to be a surgeon, stepped forward to assist Adeline. Her eyes, glossed and filled with tears, met Henry's. "I knew he had a pistol," she choked. "He always carries one. I couldn't let you face him without knowing. I had to come down and warn you." Henry could hardly believe the man would be so bold as to fire a pistol in front of a crowded inn. The quantity of witnesses was more than enough to send him to court for attempted murder, and it would not be difficult to convict him. Adeline blinked rapidly, cringing in pain. "Thank you, Adeline," Henry said. With the surgeon at her side, he stepped away, searching the room for his family. Henry rushed past the crowd, finding Eleanor and Arthur standing where he had seen them before. He pulled them into his arms. Eleanor held him tightly, her small frame shaking. She rested her head on his chest, and he smoothed his hand over her hair, cradling her head close. She stepped away, and Henry lifted Arthur off the ground. He wrapped his arms around Henry's neck, nestling his head into his shoulder. Arthur likely did not fully understand what had just occurred, but he would never have to see Mr. Quinton again. "You're safe now," Henry whispered. He wrapped his free arm around Eleanor's shoulders. She scowled up at him, her features firm. "I thought you were going to die." As soon as she said the words, tears sprung from her eyes. "You cannot do anything so dangerous again, Henry. I forbid it. I cannot lose you." He stared down at her, surprised by the tenacity of her voice. She seemed surprised by her own words as well, her watery eyes round as they stared up at him. Did she care for him more than he had thought? He couldn't stop hope from rising inside of him. Until she spoke the words, he wouldn't truly know if Eleanor loved him. But for now, as long as Eleanor and Arthur were safe, that was all that mattered. Chapter 17. Eleanor had never had a sister growing up, but with Amelia and Grace nearby, she felt that she had 2 very loving and very insightful sisters. Sisters-in-law, at least. She stood on the beach in Brighton near her childhood home, pausing to watch the waves on her walk with Amelia and Grace. After the events that had occurred 2 nights before, Henry had suggested that they take a visit to Adam to inform him of what had happened at the inn with Mr. Quinton. Eleanor felt exhausted, both mentally and physically, from all that had occurred. Even so, Grace and Amelia had been too cajoling to refuse when they suggested Eleanor take a walk with them to the seaside. Eleanor quickly discovered the motive behind their suggestion. "You really must tell him," Amelia said. "You must tell Henry you love him. It is not as difficult as it may seem. It is 3 simple words." That was not true. It was far more than 3 simple words. Eleanor could not possibly explain to Henry what he meant to her in just 3 words. "I do not think I can do it," she said, her stomach growing ill just at the thought. "Yes," Grace tipped her head back with exasperation. "You must." "Were you not afraid to tell Edward that you loved him?" Grace hesitated. "I was not so much afraid, then I was uncertain and rather stubborn. But that was a different situation entirely than your own, and you know Edward and Henry to be 2 very different sorts of men. Edward would have gone on pursuing me no matter what I said or did. But Henry, he is very patient. He will wait forever to hear those words from you. Would you not choose to put him out of his misery?" Eleanor's heart pounded. She thought of those years of darkness, when she had feared she would never be loved again, when she had felt so alone, frightened and filled with despair. She had known love, yes, for she had poured every bit of her love into Arthur, into her family that felt so far away. But she never imagined she could love someone the way she loved Henry, the way she had dreamed of love since she was a young girl. She had given up on it. She had stopped believing in it. She wanted to clear the uncertainty between herself and Henry. She wanted to share her life with him in every way, with no doubt and fear to come between them. There would be no more secrets, starting with the secret she had been hiding from him and from herself. She loved him. How do you suggest I go about telling him? I cannot simply march toward him in the drawing-room and declare my feelings." Eleanor gestured up the hill where her childhood home lay. Grace tapped her chin, a mischievous gleam entering her brown eyes. "Well, no, of course not. You must first ensure you are away from any watchful eyes, so he may kiss you all he wants when you are finished." Amelia burst into laughter, covering her mouth with one hand. Eleanor felt her cheeks grow hot. She had hardly been able to forget the kiss they had shared at the dinner party in Seaford. How could one forget something like that? "I have never known a man as patient as Henry," Grace said. "He will wait for you forever, but if you love him at all, you will not put him through his agony any longer." Grace sighed, touching her hand to her heart. "Oh, Amelia, have you seen the way he looks at her?" Amelia nodded. "It is so very romantic." Eleanor had never considered herself to be a romantic, at least not since Mr. Quinton had betrayed her. Even so, she felt a smile pulling ferociously at her lips, a surge of elation entering her heart. Henry had been right about love being capable of healing. Henry was always right. She turned to the sea, watching the waves as they moved softly with the summer breeze, raising tiny white bubbles as the water spilled over the sand. Courage spilled through her like the water, rushing up and up. "I suppose you are right. I must tell him." She took a deep breath, puffing air out from her cheeks. Amelia and Grace jumped with excitement, each woman taking one of Eleanor's arms as they walked up the beach. Eleanor's pulse raced as she mulled over the words she was going to say. Could one plan something as important as this? She felt it impossible to put her words together into coherent sentences in her mind. She struggled for air as well as words as they climbed over the rocky bank and up the slope to Adam and Amelia's home. They found Henry sitting on the back lawn with Arthur and his little cousin Ella, teaching them how to play lawn bowls. He glanced up as they approached, squinting against the sun, his smile widening when he saw Eleanor. Her heart leapt. "Come now, Arthur," Grace said, extending her hand. "Shall we go have a cup of water?" Arthur looked disappointed to be leaving the game, but he obeyed, following Grace, Ella, and Amelia to the back door of the house. Eleanor watched Grace's expression as the door closed, unable to mistake the gleam of mischief in it. Eleanor took a deep breath and sat down beside Henry. Before she could stop them, her fingers began picking at the grass in front of her. She could feel Henry's gaze on the side of her face. Why did the words refuse to come? She felt as if she had lost the ability to speak. She gathered a small stack of grass on her lap before she found the correct words to begin with. She took a breath, preparing to speak, but Henry spoke first. "Did you enjoy your walk?" His voice was deep and curious, as it always seemed to be. She gave a quick nod, meeting his eyes with a smile. "Very much." She looked down again, her eyes settling on the pile of grass on her lap. Perhaps she should count how many blades were there. Yes, that seemed like a wonderful idea. She began counting. 1, 2, 3, 4. Henry's gaze burned into the side of her face, unrelenting with each second that passed. He knew she had something to say. Why else would Grace and Amelia have whisked the children away with mischievous smiles? "How long do you wish to stay in Brighton?" Henry asked, breaking the silence once again. "Our stormy horseback ride to the inn was not what I meant when I said I wished to take you on an enjoyable ride through Worthing." Eleanor laughed, a forced, awkward sound. That was not an enjoyable ride at all, was it? No, it was not. She found his eyes again, gathering all the courage she could find within herself. Henry exercised his patience again, keeping his mouth closed until she found the strength to speak. I have been thinking," Eleanor blurted. Henry raised his eyebrows with an amused smile. "What have you been thinking about?" "I have been thinking about the story I used to tell Arthur every night before bed, and the song I used to sing him." She took a breath. "I created that story and that song as a way to dream of the future I wanted." She looked up at Henry, cursing the emotion that choked her again. "My dreams were simple and logical. I wanted to escape the life that I lived. I wanted to give Arthur the freedom to learn and find peace and happiness. That freedom could have come in a number of ways, but in my mind it was as simple as a light that would appear in our constant darkness, something so small and yet so significant." She looked up at the sky. "I had given up on dreaming of impractical things, like living in a comfortable and beautiful home, or falling in love." She bit her lip as her emotions threatened to overwhelm her. "I never knew I could have everything. I never knew I would find you." A tear slipped down the bridge of her nose. "You are everything I ever wanted, Henry. You have given me everything I ever dreamed of, and showed me the things I'd forgotten were possible. Kindness, compassion, friendship, love. You are my light, and you are Arthur's light, and I love you." Her voice cracked, and she looked at him, tears spilling freely from her eyes now, and she spoke the words again with more conviction. "I love you, Henry." She breathed, waiting for his response. He stared at her, his gaze all adoration as it swept over her face. He wiped away her tears as he always did, and she sighed. "I love you, Eleanor," he whispered before looping one arm around her waist, pulling her closer to him on the grass. His mouth broke into a smile as he leaned in, pressing his lips against hers. He kissed her without hesitation, without fear, and she did the same, burying her fingers in his hair. His kisses moved to her cheeks, her forehead, and to her lips again as they sat there on the grass. She wished he would never stop kissing her, and she doubted that he ever would if he had the choice. She had never felt more loved or wanted. Her heart soared, more certain than she had ever been that this was where she belonged, in Henry's arms, by his side, forever. When the thought struck her that Amelia and Grace might have been watching from the window, Eleanor pulled away, glancing up at the house. Her cheeks grew hot when the drapes snapped closed. She met Henry's eyes, laughing when she saw the mess she had made of his hair. "I'm sorry," she said, her laughter growing in intensity as she combed her fingers through his curls. "No, do not be sorry." Henry gave a mischievous smile of his own, leaning in to kiss her lips one more time. "That is something you must never apologize for." Epilogue. 1 year later. Brighton, with all its pebbled beaches and clear summer skies, had never been more beautiful than it was that day. Eleanor sat beside Arthur in the carriage, with Henry on the seat across from them, holding their newborn baby, Leah, as she slept, rocked to sleep by the gentle movement of the carriage over the smooth Brighton roads. They were on their way to Margaret and Lord Hove's wedding, and Eleanor was eager to have everyone meet their little girl. "Where is the church, Papa?" Arthur asked, craning his neck to see out the window. "We are nearly there," Henry said. Arthur slumped back against the cushions, a scowl marking his forehead, his large eyes casting downward in disappointment. "But we have been travelling for a very long time." "It has only been 20 minutes, Henry said in a teasing voice. Eleanor hoped Arthur would learn to emulate Henry's patience, but he was always particularly impatient when he was forced to wait to see his cousins in Brighton. "You cannot play with Ella and Oliver until the wedding is over," Eleanor reminded him. Arthur sighed quietly, staring intently out the window. "I do not like weddings." "Margaret may share some of her wedding cake with you," Eleanor said. Arthur glanced away from the window, his head tipping slightly to the side. Henry's gaze jumped to Eleanor, his eyes dancing with laughter. "Yes," Henry added, "it will be a delicious fruit cake with almond icing." Arthur's eyes widened slightly, though he tried to appear nonchalant. Henry rocked Leah as she began to stir, grinning across the carriage at Eleanor. He knew as well as she did that Arthur loved cake of any sort. They had often bargained with Arthur at the dinner table that he could not have his cake if he did not first eat the rest of his meal. Only recently had they discovered that he had been passing his roasted vegetables under the table to his cat. "Perhaps if you are well behaved, Lord Hove will give you one of the candies he keeps in his waistcoat pocket," Eleanor said. Arthur grimaced, sticking out his tongue. "I don't like those candies." Henry chuckled quietly. "Why ever not? They may have been in his pocket since his yellow waistcoat was sewn, years and years ago." Eleanor stifled her laughter for Arthur's sake, throwing Henry a berating glance for teasing him so mercilessly. She sighed with contentment. She was so happy for Margaret and Lord Hove, their unique qualities and personalities perfectly suited to one another. And above all, they both shared an abiding love of well-polished canes. She and Henry were well suited for other reasons, many that she was still discovering with each day that passed. Above all, they both shared an abiding love for Arthur, for their little Leah, and for each other, and that was all she could ever want.